You'll find a hose like this in your kit. It's labeled 22504. And if your van is an 85 and older, we're going to use the black plastic tee here and this short line. If your van is 86 and newer, two-wheel drive or a synchro, the only thing you're going to be using is the hard plastic tee here. So the first thing we need to do is actually disassemble this by cutting off these clamps here. Alright, so we need to cut off these clamps here on this whole assembly. And if your van is 85 and older, what you're going to do first is cut off this hose and then this hose. And the reason I suggest you do that, or the reason I'm telling you to do that, is because you need to reuse this hose here. And you don't want to cut it with the diagonal cutters, or sometimes we call them dikes. So what you're going to do first is spray the fitting down with some WD-40. And then you're going to hold it securely in your hand and be careful not to slip and cut yourself. And you're just going to come in with the diagonal cutters and just get the end of it underneath the clamp and start to nibble away. And you'll slowly work your way in to the clamp all the way to the far side here. The safest way to use the dikes is to separate the two motions of cutting and pushing. So we're going to push and then cut, push and then cut. Okay, so let's see how we did. I'll pull the clamp off. I'll look at the hose. And actually, I did a pretty good job on my first shot there. The hose isn't cut at all. There we go. And we can pull it off. We can set this hose aside. Next, we're going to practice with this hose here. Same procedure. WD-40. I'll then come in with my pair of dikes and start nibbling away at the hose. Okay, let's see how we did on the second hose. Okay, on this one, when I cut in, right where the barb starts, I just nicked the hose. So now when I go to do the third one, I know I have to be really careful. We don't want this to happen with the hose that we're going to need to reuse. There we go. So now we've got the clamp completely off. Let's see how we did. Not bad. There's no cuts in the hose. So same procedure. I'm just going to take my WD-40, spray down the hose a bit to help separate it from the hard plastic tee, and pull it off. And there we go. So now, if your van is 85 and down, you're going to reuse this little guy and the black plastic tee. If you're an 86 and newer two-wheel drive or synchro, you're only going to reuse the black plastic tee. Since this is all disassembled, we can set this aside for now and move on to the next step. The next hose to go on is this long molded hose. It's labeled 22288. And first, we're going to take two number 24 hose clamps, and we're just going to slide them onto the hose so we don't lose them. This is the nipple here for the water pump inlet. It's this guy here, this aluminum nipple. And the hose that's going to get attached to that is the one labeled 22288. And you'll see it has a tighter bend here on this end, and it's more straight here. It's the end with the tight bend that's going to get attached to that nipple. So I'll come back with my nut driver, and I'm going to hold the hose about like this and just tighten down the hose clamp. So on the end of the hose, number 22288, will go the black tee that we previously disassembled. You simply slide the hose and the black tee together, and then you can see here the clamp is oriented so that the screw is on the back side. And that just makes it easier to get to later on, and that will leave you more room in this area for the hose that will be attached there. When the black tee is in position and it hangs naturally, you want it so that the small nipple here is pointing across the back of the engine. If your van is an 85 and older, the next hose to go onto the end of the black tee is the short line that we removed from it earlier. So you'll simply push that onto the T and then slide on 2 number 24 hose clamps. This one you'll tighten down all the way, and then this one you'll just snug down so you don't lose it. The next hose to go on the end of this black T, if your van is 86 and newer or a synchro, is this larger hose labeled 20088. And it's the same procedure. You're just going to slide it onto the T and then slide on your 2 number 24 hose clamps, and you'll tighten those down. The second one will slide on, and we're just going to snug that down so we don't lose it. And the difference between the 86 tool drives and the synchros is that on a tool drive van, you're going to use a short section of hose here. If your van is a synchro, you're going to use essentially the whole length of hose. So what you'll do is leave the hose as is, wait till the whole engine and transmission is installed into the van. Then you can see how much you need here. You can cut it to length and then attach it to the return line coming from the radiator underneath the van again. If your van is 85 and older, the last hose to go on will be labeled 21204, and it's this long hose here. In your kit, you're going to find a paper template like this, and what you're going to need to do is cut it out. It doesn't have to be accurate, but you're going to cut it out so it looks something like that. And on the paper, you'll see it says two-wheel drive and synchro, and those are the two lines that will correspond to where you need to cut the hose. So we have our hose here, and I've already cut out the sheet of paper. You're going to line up this end of the paper here with the end of the hose. This is for two-wheel drive, the 85s and older. You would make your line here on the hose. So you'll come back with your Sharpie. You'll make a rough mark on the hose, and that's it. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a mark on the hose there. Then I'll come back with my scissors, and I'll actually cut the hose perpendicular to itself, so it's a nice straight cut. When the hose is cut, it'll look something like this. And you can see the edge there is nice and square, and even on this side, the edge is nice and square. Since we're talking about 85s and down, you're going to use this section of hose, and then it'll get slipped onto this nipple here on the thermostat housing. And it'll get put onto the housing in this orientation here. So it looks like that. Then you would come back with your two number 24 hose clamps. You'll slide it on to the hose, and you'll tighten it down. In the case of this hose, we want the clamp so that it's on the outside of the hose here and not between the head and the hose. So we would come back, tighten this down, and then the other end of the hose will also get a number 24 hose clamp, and we're just going to snug that down for now. Once the engine's in the van, you'll connect this line to the main send line of the radiator for the van. And that's it. Alright, if your van is a synchro, you're going to use the hose labeled 21204. And in your kit, you'll see a paper template. And on the paper template, it says two-wheel drive and synchro. What you're going to do is cut this template out roughly, so it looks something like this. And then you're going to hold the template down over this hose. And you're going to hold it on the end here with the tight bends. So I'll lay the sheet of paper on the end of the hose, lining the end up with the end of the hose. And I'm just going to roughly follow the paper along the edge of the hose to see where the cut lines line up. So let me do this here so you guys can see a little better and I can get a better angle on it. There you go. Okay, so you'll see the line here that says synchro ends roughly in this area in the hose. So I will hold it there. I'll take my Sharpie. I'll mark the hose. I'll then come in with a pair of scissors and make a cut on the hose perpendicular to the hose right on the mark. So when I'm done cutting it, it'll look something like that. In the case of the synchros, you're going to use the longer half of the hose. And this will simply get a number 24 hose clamp slid onto it, shot a WD-40, and then I'm just going to push the hose onto the nipple here on the thermostat. I'll then rotate the hose so it's down like this, slide the clamp into place, and then tighten it down. I'll then take the last number 24 hose clamp, slide it onto the end of the hose, and just snug it down so we don't lose it. This end of the hose eventually will be connected to the hard line underneath the van, and that's the send line going to the radiator front. So for now, leave this hose as is. Once the whole conversion is in the van, you can see where the hard line ends and where this line ends. Slide them together, get a good length on it, pull them apart, make a cut, then reassemble it, and you'll have a nice, clean, and neat installation. And that's it. If your van is an 86 and newer two-wheel drive van, you're going to have a hose in your kit labeled 20710. For this hose, we're going to take one of the number 24 hose clamps, slide it onto the long straight end here, and just snug it down so we don't lose it. The other end is also going to get a number 24 hose clamp. And we're going to slide that on. And then we're going to slide the whole assembly onto the large nipple here on the thermostat. And we're going to bring our hose clamp into place. And we're going to tighten it down. Now there's a couple of things I want to point out about this hose. The first thing is the hose is a larger diameter than the nipple on the thermostat housing, and that's fine. Just tighten down the hose clamp until you can feel it's tight. It will make a good seal and it won't leak. The next thing you need to do is once the whole conversion is installed into the van, you'll need to come back and cut this hose to length. We've found there's several variables with the hoses underneath the van and the two-wheel drives in this area. So we have a nice long hose here with good bends in it so that you can trim off some from this end or trim off from this end to get a nice clean routing. But you'll have to wait until the whole assembly is installed into the van. So for now, leave the hose on the thermostat housing, leave it at its complete length, wait till it's installed, and then you can make your adjustments. And that's all for that hose. Okay, so this is the SKC assembled onto the engine. And this is about what it'll look like for most of you out there. A couple of things I want to point out is that all these hose lengths are longer than they need to be. And we did that so that once you have the whole conversion installed into the van, you can then go back, cut the hoses, or trim them to length, and get a nice clean routing. I also want to note that on some of the 1985 vans, it was a crossover year, and if you've got a van that's 85 with plastic hoses, there's a set of instructions in the kit, and that'll tell you the other hoses you need to purchase on your own. They're not expensive. They're about $10 a piece. And that's the fix for the crossover 85 year. Other than that, that's it for